I am Mel Fegler. I am the Executive Director of Pollinators Prospering People, or PX3, as we often refer to ourselves as. This is one of my incredible, my executive, Vice Executive Chair, Lindsay Hollister, who you may have known from different places. So tonight, when Tom asked me to speak to y'all tonight, I really had to step back and think about how do I discuss pollinators with a group of highly educated people, and how could I encourage them to move forward in a positive direction. So we talk all the time about the threats of different habitat types and the threats of the things that are living within those habitats, but you know, when it comes down to pollinators, it is the movement of our time. It is our decision right here and now whether we're going to maintain part of the natural world and our piece in that natural world, or if we're going to give it up and become artificial. So it's one of those things that it's a decision is time. So the threats are the same. They're the same that you hear at every wildlife conversation. They're the same that you hear in every presentation at your kids' schools. It's the same that you see all over Facebook. The threats are the very same. And the biggest threat really to all wildlife, but particularly for pollinators, is just complacency. It isn't enough anymore to know about the threats. You have to be a personal positive impact to everybody you see. And so what PX3 really tries to do is never point any fingers at people, and I'm certainly not going to be pointing fingers tonight either, I think, but I'm asking you to not point fingers either. Have you ever heard of, it's a philosophical kind of question of perception. And if you perceive yourself in one way, it's how we perceive ourselves, how others perceive us, and how we think people perceive us. So we're going to talk all tonight about how people actually perceive us and what they see when they see you, and your power to the other thing PX3 doesn't talk about as an organization very often is politics, and your vote and how impactful that can be. I also like to express in this one comment on politics is people don't know how their representatives vote. They often vote one party or the other, assuming that one party is responsible for destruction and one party is responsible for conservation. It's the consumers and the non-consumers of this world, and it's really not true. You have to look at your representatives and start nagging all of them to vote better. And oftentimes you find that they do care about those images of themselves. They care how they're perceived as well, and what they think the public thinks they're perceived as and what they are actually perceived as. They would much rather have the image of what they want to be perceived as and how they perceive themselves. Meaning they think they're conservationists because they're part of a group that conserves nature one way or the other. So your vote is very impactful. Go out there and have a conversation with your rep. And that's one of the things that we really try to encourage in this conversation. So when we talk about the value of pollinators, I'm a walker. All right. So when we talk about this is a PDF, so these are not going to flip through like they're supposed to, but that's okay. The very first of these hexagons is to describe the very typical text that we know, which is 75% of our food, or every 3/4 bite of food you take on your plate, is due to a pollinator. The next slide is a plate with a lot of meat on it. With that 3 or 4 bites of your food being the result of a pollinator does not include our edibles. And then the next slide is a cute little picture of a bunch of piggy butts. And they don't like to talk about it either, but it is a real concept that our edibles also require edibles provided by pollinators. So when you say 3 of your 4 bites of food is due to a pollinator, you're really kind of shooting it short if you're also a meat eater. Or an omnivore. I can use the proper terminology for that. The next thing that is on this hexagon is it kind of starts moving more into our ecological services that are provided by proper habitat, and how do we make that happen so we, as the human piece of that, are impacted in a positive way, and how can we have a positive impact on those things that infect us, rather than just complaining about the floodwaters and the stormwater management and the dirty water in the bay and all of those things. So what it then rolls into is showing how important pollinators are to the food chain. So we can really start there. Not only are pollinators a direct source of food for a good amount of our birds and other animals, but they also are responsible for the bottom of the food chain. So plants do not proliferate without seeds. You have a good number of animals that feed on seed alone. All of those things are because of pollinators. And then we go back to the real core of that bottom of the food chain, the plants themselves, right? And the plants themselves are responsible for things like stormwater management, carbon sequestration, cleaner air, which is the carbon and nitrogen sequestration, and these valuable ecological services that when you really get down to who's responsible for it, guess who it is? If you are a birder, or if you're on the consumer or the non-consumer side of waterfowl, then you want pollinators around because they will not be around. 95% of our bird species feed their babies caterpillars. 95%. Grubs are another big source. Baby bees, sadly enough, are another, particularly of our wild nests, like my favorite bumble bees. So all of this results into these ecological services that are incredibly important. So this is what PX3 likes to do, is we like to challenge you, and you can either do this on paper, or if you've pulled up Kahoot It, we can give you the game code. But we've gone through quite a bit of time. So if anybody wants to self-assess, I will walk you through this, and you can try the Kahoot It later if you choose, since we're a little short on time. So this is our pollinator challenge, and we have this on our website, and we use this at tabling events. It's really kind of just a self-check. You don't have to tell anyone. You can do it in the privacy of your own home. We have it on our website. Just don't use Google until after, right? So the whole idea is to determine what level of knowledge you actually have about pollinators and their value. So each prompt, there are 10 prompts, you are to give yourself a value of 1 to 10. You are then going to add up the values for those 10 prompts, and you'll get something between between 10 and 100. I'll do my math, not like a Polish Texas Aggie. So when you complete your pollinator challenge, we'll kind of run through these prompts. And I encourage you to work through this. Every tabling event we have, the reason we made this was because of your populace, the people sitting in this room. We were talking to highly educated people, people who were running for office, people who were judges, people who were running for attorney general, the county? A county executive. There were people out there, medical doctors, these types of things, and none of these questions made any sense to them. They had no idea how to define it at all, and they were scoring themselves incredibly low. So the very first prompt is pollination, not pollinator. Pollination. What do you know about it? Do you really know what it is? Give yourself a score 1 to 10.
Do you want to give out the Kahoot code or just skip it?
We can skip the Kahoot code. I'm not sure that we have time, really. And everybody can go and reevaluate this online. So, and then Pollinator Ecological Services. I just let you cheat a little by my prior description, but I'll give you that one. So you have to give yourself a score 1 to 10 of what you know about the ecological services that are a consequence of having pollinators in the world. Pollinator Needs. Do you know what it takes to have healthy pollinator all-year habitat on your property? Do you know what the host versus a nectar plant are? What is a host plant versus a forage plant? 1 to 10. What is the connection between human and pollinators? Do you know the difference between a honeybee, a bumblebee, a carpenter bee, and other solitary bees? I get this all the time. I wouldn't kill those bumblebees if they wouldn't eat my house. They're not bumbles. They're a solitary bee, guys. They're shiny. They look like they see an escutcheon. They have no hair on them. They're not the best pollinators, but they're not the worst. But they do eat your house, but they are not a bumblebee. But what you use on them to get rid of them does affect bumblebees. Do you know your lepidopterans? A lepidopteran, see, there you go. A lepidopteran is your moths. Now, I'll let you give yourself a second value of this because it is a big word. It's your moths, your skippers, and your butterflies. Do you know how to tell them apart when they're out, who they pollinate? Who is the best pollinator on that list? All right. So, pollinators and our edibles. How is that important? What is that value? What do you know about pollinators and our edibles? Do you know your bee ID? This is kind of further into your solitary bee ID, one of our more valued 528 species here on the Mid-Atlantic and Maryland. And what is your comfort level with bees? I did talk to a couple of you who are actually keepers. Are you comfortable around bees? Do you know you can pet a bumblebee and they don't care? You can sit and pet them all day long and they'll just do their job. That's what they do. Can they sting you? Yeah. Does it hurt? It does. But unless they are squashed, trapped in your clothes, or being stepped on, or if you fumbly grab hold of their whole hive with your hand, you are not likely to be stung by a bumblebee. So there we go, guys. You can self-assess. If you go onto our website, again, which is PX3-Pollinators.com, we have different levels. Level 1 offers you several ideas of what you can do in the next year to increase your knowledge about pollinators. I have fun books on there. So Dave Goulson's A Sting in the Tail, My Adventures with Bumblebees is on there. I have Obsession with Butterflies, which is a really great Politics of Bugs book as well, and to learn about butterflies and other lepidopterans. Now you've learned a new word tonight. So see what level you are, and then let us know how we can help you. So one of the biggest risks that we talk about is pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and this is where two things you have the power to control. You are someone who purchases services, you purchase products, you have buyer's power. You also have a vote, which I think I've gone on and on about enough. So, but your buyer's power is incredibly important. And other people, you can be a model of the more correct way to be. It's a really complicated story for all of us. And I will tell y'all right now, I will go into habitat and delawnifying. I have a landlord that if I don't keep the part that he can see mowed, he will come when I'm not home, spray the whole place, and mow it all down. So I don't have a choice but to have some lawn as well. So don't think that I am out of the complications just because I adore pollinators and because I advocate them so much. We all have complicated stories, and it's again, not an idea of let me point my finger at you and say, why are you doing this wrong? What do you think you could do better? So with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, one of the biggest issues, sorry, Scott, that we have, he just gave up on me, clearly.
I got you here now.
All right, so one of private landowner practices. So when we go and we buy our own Roundup and we accidentally buy the 50% concentrate Roundup and not the 2% Roundup, and then we start spraying the 50% concentrate on everything, and then we wonder why the whole place is brown, and it's like the silent spring. Well, that's because you just killed everything because you didn't read the directions or the concentration of pesticide you're using. I highly doubt that this room needs to have that conversation with anybody. But it is one of the biggest issues with pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides is private landowner self-usage of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Not reading the directions, not realizing that the wind should not be over 5 miles per hour, and you should actually get up before the bumblebees, which is awfully early to spray. When you purchase your landscape practices, we have this wonderful new thing here, and it's the Chesapeake Conservation Landscape Certification. And you have numerous organizations here and companies that are getting these. That means they are least harm companies. And they will do your lawn in the most fair, least harm practice possible. They will encourage you to learn more about why they use certain practices, how it saves you money, time, and makes you feel really good about what you're doing. Spending your money the right way sends a message. So you all have schools, parks, you work at government facilities, you have churches, you have homes, you have whatever the case might be. So again, your buyer's choice, and you sitting on a board and having clout to have a conversation with your other board members and saying, hey, the church is using this landscape company and it's True Green. And I myself have seen a company like that hosing down plants, edibles, right next to a beehive at 10 a.m. at 10-mile-per-hour winds. They have no enforcement, they have no rules, nobody's going to get them into trouble, and that's where not only are your buyers' clout important, but also your vote, because those industry standards should be better. They should be enforced, and someone should be making note that they're getting away with the biggest amount of pollinator death episodes. You may have seen, if any of you know who Sam Droege is, he recently had on Facebook some 1,600 bees in one instant, one tree in one instant of bad practice of a professional landscaping company that he will not share the name of. He works for the government, so he can't really do that. So the whole thing is I had 2 years ago, I knew I had 8 bumblebee hives. And I was so proud and so excited. I came home to these little tags all over my yard that said True Green had been there. And I had to walk around my yard and find all the dead bumblebees. And I knew I would have no bumblebees that year. I would have no pollination on my edibles, and that my edibles were no longer edibles. They were trash, and I should throw them away. So all of these things are important, and so I want y'all to realize that. Climate change is a deeper conversation than we really have time for, particularly with the short time. But I do encourage you to go to U.S. Phenology Network. They talk about the ecological services of pollinators and other species that are affected by the changed observations that we have seen through time. The things that are affected ecologically speaking and service-wise, the relationships between these bloom times, emergence times of vegetables and plants, and bees and their pollinators, flight times, productivity changes, sequestration of your carbons and your nitrogens, hydrology, stormwater management, severe weather patterns, and dramatic natural other events. All of these things are seen either on NOAA. They have a really great display of all of this and the connective patterns, as well as U.S. Phenology Network. And that's all the gloom and doom I want to talk about this evening, because we're going to talk about, well, we're not. One more thing, I'm sorry. So when you have a lot of challenges in your habitat and you are drinking bad water and you are eating pollen that is contaminated, you're going to be more susceptible to disease. Those of us who do not take care of our bodies are more susceptible to disease. It's just a well-known biological fact. If you don't take care of your body, then you're going to have less fecundity, which is your ability to have offspring that are reproducible. Your ability to learn. So there are studies out there that prove in the presence of pesticides, honeybees have less ability to learn the communication skills it takes to get to their foraging grounds and how to learn their jobs within the hive. It was at I don't know if anybody goes to the Chesapeake Pesticide Education Network conference. We had a really great presenter a couple of years back, and he did this entire wonderful study. Sad results, but it's something that we really have to think about. The efficiency of pollination. The ability for a bumblebee to sonicate, which means our blueberries and our tomatoes and our peppers, all of these things that hold onto their pollen so tight until somebody big and bumbly like a bumblebee rattles their thorax and shakes the pollen off. They lose the strength to do that as efficiently I don't want to say they're losing the ability, because that's a dangerously traumatic way to say it, but they are losing their efficiency in the process. How long they live, can they live long enough to complete their job in a hive? Can they live long enough as a solitary bee to rear an entire nest? Because if that nest is not taken care of, whether they're a solitary bee or a social bee, those babies will not survive and then be the next generation of those pollinators. So the species density eventually would be affected, and then our richness is the next consequence of that. Now we're to the fun part. I promised a fun part, right? So the great thing is that we do have a diminished pollinator population. There is no doubt. We know that their numbers are down. But here's the good news, is on the mid-Atlantic alone, we have 2.2 trillion pollinators. Now here's the kicker that you get to ask yourself what your place looks like. There are 20,000 pollinators on every 1 acre of floral space. Do you have an acre of floral space? So that's a good question to ask, and this is where that conversation that Sam Droege spoke in Washington, D.C. and said, delawnify. Lawns are not floral space. They don't support pollinators. So that's one of the big things that we really want to have people take a look at. Your house, your office, your church, your kids' schools, whatever the case is. How much space is there that's requiring a ton of gas, maintenance on equipment, and to man the person who is going to mow it at a very high level, or a very low level, I'm sorry, to even crop off the heads of the clover, which is really tough, actually. So just to keep that. Everything living thing needs 4 things, right? We all know this: shelter, water, food, space. So that means if you want to be good at proper pollinator habitat, you have to have all of these things in every season. So there's the kicker. You need to be able to manage your wintering habitat as well as the 3 floral seasons there are in Maryland, because you don't live in Alaska. You have 3 full, beautiful seasons to grow flowers. And with that, that means that you need to have foraging flowers that bloom all in a nice, neat line, right, of time, for all 3 floral seasons. You should provide water. I have a slide up here somewhere that'll demonstrate one way that you can provide water. Every morning, I fill up the water of the chickens, the pig, the pollinators, and the Labrador. And the cats can drink with the Labrador, I don't care. All right, so next. So if you are planning for pollinators, you need to think all 4 seasons. Do I have wintering habitat? Do I have a place to keep those pollinators to overwinter in my yard so they wake up and then they're like, hey, there's a great 3-season habitat spot right here where I am. If you're as big of as a bumblebee, do you think you really want to go far before you find your nest? A bumblebee hibernates in a very different spot than it makes its nests. But it doesn't want to go far. They're big animals, particularly for an insect. I don't know if any of you have ever used the product Mary Kay before, and she's always used the quote, why does the bumblebee fly? Because nobody told it couldn't. Now, physics has since then determined why it is a bumblebee indeed can physically fly, but it was a quote that was used forever, and it was said by a famous physicist in the first place. So bumblebees don't want to fly far, is really the point. They can, but they don't want to. This is my watering system, by the way. Got these cute little bowls. One of the big things with water is to make sure you have stones and cute rocks. I collect rocks that look like hearts from all over. I've lived all over the country. My husband's still active duty, so as we have traveled all over the place, I collect heart-stoned shaped stones. And so I put them in little dishes and I fill them with a little bit of water so that things don't drown. And that's where they get their water from. And it's always covered in bees. It's also very close to my mountain mint, my button bush, my summer sweet, my sweet spire, my sedum, whatever it is, my mint, bee balm. What else do I have? Milkweed, tithonia, bachelor's button. Yep, I have, blueberries. And then my edibles, which is a whole nother long list. So we can help you with this. This is the services we provide. We believe in sustainability. And so we're going to get to more of the sustainability piece after we talk about the design and implementation that we can do for you. So please visit our website and see the services we provide and have us come out to your property and assess. It's $50. We come out, we tell you what you could do better. You can buy your design and you can do whatever you want with it at that point. If you want us to do it or if you want to do it yourself because you're a crazy master gardener and you've got this, then we can hand it over to you and it's yours. So these are kind of the things that you might want to consider at your house as far as habitat. So when you want wintering habitat, if you have a garden made of natural wood, it works really well for wintering habitat. Mulch piles, the prior picture with the water bowls, I fill that up with mulch. We have had a bumblebee queen 1 year did overwinter in the mulch pile, and it was almost accidentally. So I was like, okay, so that's the spot. I'm just going to put the water bowls there, and it looks cute. What are you going to do? They also like old rotten logs, and you'll notice in that picture there was also an old rotten log, a pile of mulch, and a water source. They come out of that, an old rotten log. You know, not driftwood, but an old rotten log. I think I like cherry a lot. It's pretty. It's got the stripes. So you might be wondering, some of these are hay bales. Bumblebees love hay bales. You can build a bumblebee house, especially if you take our bumblebee course, our workshop. You can use an old pot turned upside down with a plank over the top of it. It's super easy. And they really like that one. It's a really valued one, is the pot one. So if you see the tube kind of down at the bottom, I'm sorry for my artsy fartsiness, but there is a tube. They do prefer actually to go underground depending upon the species and then up into their hive. So, but then you have species like Lindsay is hosting a bumblebee nest in a birdhouse that she has up in a tree. So it very much depends if it's impatiens, vagans, bimaculatus, and which of the 13 Maryland bumblebees might be inhabiting your space. It's fun to ID them, and you can come and we do our workshops. Now, you do have to do workshops seasonally. Bumblebees emerge first. So our bumblebee workshops are in February and March. Our solitary bees, they emerge next. So you're looking at early May and June. And then our caterpillars to butterflies are in the latter summer because they will fly up through November even sometimes. Next slide. One of the things in that picture I showed you again in this is, you notice my husband's morning glory. I give him a couple things, but it does serve a purpose. So when I have solitary bees in the rotten wood, it's been up for 4 years and nothing's broken yet. So if you build one of these natural garden enclosures, you will have solitary bees come and use the wood. They're right next to your garden, guys. That's all your specialists, your gourds. You know, you have squash bees. They do all your gourds for you. They all can live right there that you provide for them. And so you are inviting them, hosting them alongside your edibles. Now, the other great thing about your space, and I'll finish up about the plants covering the logs, it does provide the solitary bees just a little bit more protection from a lot of heat, from desiccation, and from predators. So it's good to have something. It's not the best choice, but sometimes you just choose your battles, right? You can build lots of cool different habitats, and in our solitary bees, you do leave with a bee condo. We always build something in our workshops because it's fun. All right, Lindsay. Now here's our other big thing in sustainability, is the more something is used, the more something it is visited, the more presence that is there, the more likely it is that we'll be taken care of. I will tell you why PX3 started. I traveled this country working in restoration as a natural resource manager for 10 years, 10 plus years. Now it's like almost 15. And noticing and knowing that monitoring efforts on any restoration site only have to go for 5 years. After that, they're usually mowed down, they fall into succession, or they're just not properly implemented so that they can take care of themselves, and they fall to waste. Having seen that all over the country with some tremendous planners and people, we felt, as a group of us for natural resource management, that something needed else to be done. And what was the missing piece? I feel like it's people. I feel like it's you and me, our kids, and the involvement that it takes in your own space. You have now created an outdoor classroom and a place that you can go learn in your pajamas and your coffee cup, your glass of wine, whatever you want to hang out in your garden with. You can do that and learn about all these species. We can teach you how to look at solitary bees and know what family you're looking at. We can go over your Bumble Bee ID for you. And then even better, you can get involved in national efforts that have real impact on management decisions all over this country and in policy. So some of those programs are listed here. I will pitch a little bit for the Integrated Monarch Monitoring Program. We are formal partners of Monarch Joint Venture. We were awarded that last year. In our first year, will be September 22nd. So that is 72 different organizations, ZRC's Pollinator Partnership, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, those guys. And we all come together and try to get people involved on a national effort to impact policy and people's own behaviors in their own properties. Go ahead, Lindsay. Now,
NABA is this weekend.
NABA is this weekend, and we're about to go over that. So we did adopt a NABA butterfly count area. What you do, the North American Butterfly Association, you can adopt a 15-mile radius area, and which we have done. We have the southern Anne Arundel County area. And so at Jug Bay Wetland Sanctuary, really at Paris and Glendenning Nature Preserve, we meet. We train you up at 9 o'clock. You go out with a lead that knows their butterflies, and Lord forbid your skippers, really well. And you count them that day. And it's a national effort. We choose to do one in the spring. You do 3 a year. One in the summer and one in the fall. Our birthday, September 22nd, is coinciding with Monarch Fiesta at Glendenning as well, at Paris and Glendenning as well, and we will also be doing a NABA butterfly count that day. But if this Saturday you'd like to join us and see what we're really all about, at Paris and Glendenning Nature Preserve, that's 5702 Plummer Lane, Lothian, Maryland.
Where is that? Is that Jug Bay?
It's Jug Bay Wetland Sanctuary. Yeah, so you can go to jugbay.org and get the address, or it's 5702 Plummer Lane, Lothian, Maryland. So Paris and Glendenning Nature Preserve.
Never heard it called that.
Yeah, it's its name. So when you type it into a map, that's how you would get there. So
Go to the visitor center.
yeah, you don't want to go to Jug Bay Wetland Sanctuary Visitor Center because that's a whole different property of ours. So you want to go to the Nature Preserve, which is where you can have puppies and the butterfly garden is, and we have a research house and 2 barns. Yes. Yep, so at 9 a.m. we train you all up, we split you into teams, and we all go for about 2 hours and count butterflies. What a better way to spend half of your Saturday. I don't know a better way. Some of our other things, we do have butterfly phenology that was created here. It is part of Nature's Notebook, which is part of U.S. Phenology Network. We have just started the very first, as a NARE site, a National Estuary Research Reserve site, and part of the Chesapeake Bay component, a fresh tidal estuary pollinator inventory. So we're working directly with Sam Droege on this. We're very excited to be the pilot for all of the 29 NARES communities across the country to also do this study in future years, but we will pilot the first with Sam. So you would come and help us process. You can either go out on the boat with me if you really want to. That bottom picture is Jug Bay at 5 in the morning. It's a beautiful place. So we go out and we set the bee bowls and we collect and do the pollinator inventory, and then we process them, and then we ID them to the best efforts that we can, and then Sam confirms that we're right or wrong. Now, the other things that we have, like I said, we have our workshop series. We have our bumblebee workshops. There's a 1 and 2. Solitary bees, there's a 1 and 2, and then caterpillars to butterflies. And then our short version of caterpillars to butterflies are always our NABA butterfly counts. So we want to thank you. PX3 and Pollinators both thank you. I'm Mel, again, Mel Fegler, and this is Lindsay Hollister. If you have any questions, and again, I really want to apologize and thank you for hanging out with us.
Say, I go to that church, Bruce Berlin is my neighbor, who's executive director of the pesticide. And I go to their thing every year, but they passed a law to get out of Macon Center to get rid of the neonicotinoids. But what you're saying, the professional lawn people can still use this stuff? Is that the problem?
They're still using a host of products that when you look at their 50% lethal dose I believe when you look at the receipt, because when they leave you what they've left you and how much and what concentration. They have it just below that 50% lethal dose. And you have to remember that that is lethal dose on contact only. That is not lethal dose ingested. So a bumblebee cleans themselves all the time. So do honeybees. We all know you use smoke on a honeybee. Why?
Two reasons. The queen sends out her pheromones, so if you try to get near the hive, she'll try to protect it and it masks her pheromones. The other reason is that wild boys said it's in her DNA in case there's a forest fire, they go into the hive.
They do, and also they can't stand it on their bodies, and they start grooming. So they're madly grooming instead of stinging you. And so there are a lot of that ingestible 50-50 lethal dose is contact. And that's what the legal standards are.
So I live on a relatively large piece of property, and we have a major invasive species problem, like oakberry, poison sumac, wisteria, Alliances tree, like we've got it all. And the county has come and sprayed and cleared our property multiple times because our property is under conservation easement and we're on Weems Creek. So I just don't know what else to do. I mean, the poke is so prolific that like other species like, hawks and eagles, believe it or not, bald eagles I've seen, here in Annapolis can't hunt. But it's like, how bad is Roundup?
Well, okay, so there's a time and a place for everything. And I will tell you, so there is a reason there is 50% Roundup that is sold at Home Depot, and that is for stump painting. It's not for foliar spraying. So foliar spraying can be much more impactful as an overspreading. That's how you get pesticide drift, because it's in the air. When you stump paint, you are cutting something and literally somebody right behind you is painting that stump. And there are a good number of your invasive species that respond to that. Foliar spray often works better in a dual or even tri methodology approach, burning, pesticides, and manual removal. There's people who use goats to take it down as far as they can, and then they do the manual cutting and painting. There are different methods, and I know that's what I was expressing. It's complicated for all of us. Some of us have really complicated situations that aren't going to be easy to handle. If they have been coming and doing their approach for a good number of years and it's still not working, well, certainly already there's a reason to look at a different approach, or at least a multitude of approaches together, which in restoration and invasive species management, often you have to use more than one type of management at a time. Yes.
Depending on who did your plant assessment also, I'm curious about the reason they would want you to remove a native pokeweed. Depending on what you're actually identifying these things as, like poison sumac, as far as I know, that doesn't even occur around here. And the poke, I leave that up intentionally, like the mockingbirds love to eat those berries, and there's flowers for the pollinators. So several of those species, yes, they're weedy species. They may not be like something you want in a formal front yard garden, but part of our whole message is about shifting the paradigm, because some of these things, they may not be front yard plants, but they are a part of the ecosystem. They're naturally occurring. So there's a lot of things that I think we need to put the brakes on in general, on spraying. Even poison ivy. I have a friend who calls it sister ivy because it has its place. Yeah, I don't want it on my skin, but again, it has flowers for pollinators, it has berries for the wildlife. So we shouldn't just automatically just attack everything that isn't personally aesthetically pleasing to us. So I just wanted to add that. And also, if they're trying to develop a conservation management plan for you, there's other organizations besides the county government who can assist you with something that's more of a best management practice, that is avoiding the pesticides and doing everything else before that to try to control whatever you're trying to control. Pesticides should be the last resort on a site, not the first option.
Get the goats. Get those goats. That's right. That's absolutely right. Do you know that we're actually the only species on the planet allergic to poison ivy, and only 70% of us are? So I am not. So it can grow everywhere for all I care.
So I had two comments. I got a young Emerald County beekeeper, so I'm on call. Anybody? I got a call the other day. The guy had a swarm underneath his shed, and he said it was honeybees. And I didn't go. He called me back and said it was yellow jackets. Now, they're dangerous. I mean, they really are. But the problem with them is, and they're a pollinator. They're a very good pollinator. They also kill a lot of. I'm sorry.
They're a good predator. A good predator. A beneficiary insect. Yeah.
They will kill a lot of the pests in the garden. You hate to kill them, but you have to sometimes because they're dangerous to children and to other people. The other thing I want to ask you about, maybe what do you do about carpenter bees? I heard that you can paint like a sky blue on your wood. It makes them think they got to go up. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's just an old farm tale.
I think that there's a lot of innovative approach studies out there about what to do with carpenter bees outside of, sealing up the holes, painting it. They used to not even go for treated wood, and now they do. I mean, it's a habitat, priority habitat loss thing. I will say that we don't have much of our house that's made of wood, I guess, and even our deck is that. And then we have the wooden space in our enclosed garden, and they do hang out in there. But look at some of those innovative responses to carpenter bees specifically. I mean, you can tell anyone that, hey, go put out untreated wood, and they'll go to it first. It's not always true. They're a tough species. And if you have a lot of wood, then they will probably get into it. Carpenter bees are not our best, not our worst. So you can really measure the efficiency of a pollinator by how much hair they have. The more like Chewbacca they are, the better pollinator they're going to be. Chewbacca, Star Wars. Chewbacca. Furry. Big, furry, Labrador. Yeah, not a Star Wars fan. So the bigger and furrier they are, the more efficient pollinators they're going to be, which it brings us, to our butterflies. They're such a sexy species, and everybody uses them as that comfort species to draw people into the pollinator world. They're not the best pollinators. But that's okay. Their cousin moths and skippers are amazing pollinators, and butterflies are pretty. They do some pollination. They're not the best. They might be the worst. Yes, sir.
I have 1,000 square foot meadow that I built in my
Nice.
yard. And I do see pollinators there, I see bumble bees and butterflies and stuff. But I don't know how to assess whether or not I have a healthy population of those animals in that space. Can you give me an idea of how I might evaluate that?
Well, I think one of those would be to take our workshop series so that you could, if you wanted to, self-identify what you're seeing. The other thing that you could do is have a known entity come out and assess for you. It's a service that's not that tough to identify, particularly bumblebees. A lot of bumblebees can be identified just by sight. And then you can go even further and ask for a pollinator inventory, but just realize that consequence, even though we do have, like I said, 20,000 pollinators per acre of space and 2.2 trillion on the mid-Atlantic, it does mean permanent collection of those species. But there's a lot you can do if you know at least your families. You can evaluate species richness just by going and seeing how many different families of solitary bees you're seeing, and it gives you at least a basic knowledge. And your bumblebees, like I said, they're easy.
My impression has been that there aren't that many, and but I also.
In density or richness? So like density, like you see bumbles, but you don't see many bumbles, or you don't see many different types of bumbles? Okay. Well, then I would suggest a property assessment and have somebody come and look at your floral display and see what months and when and your wintering habitat. There might be a reason that you're not keeping them there and hosting them permanently. Yes?
In addition to the workshops you have at Drug Bay, do you guys do anything for like students for a field trip?
If there are 10 or more within your group, you can meet us really wherever you want. You can have us come out, or we can bring you over to the sanctuary. We use the sanctuary a lot because we're so familiar with it, and it's a really great place. I mean, it's.
But do you have any like programs that you do with the kids, or we can just bring the kids there?
You would have to organize it with us, and we could become objective-centered of what you're hoping they can focus on. We are, so just to give you an idea of why we spout, we can do all of these services, which I think is really important. You know, you can be a jack of all trades, but not really great at anything. So I want to be really clear that of our board members in our group, we are a host of women and our treasurer, my husband, but of natural resource managers. So I have a master's in natural resource management, outdoor educators, landscape designers, and people who work really for Chesapeake Bay National Estuary Research Reserve, DNR, are paying gigs, are also in restoration. So we really do work very hard. I'm a former formal educator. Between my marine biology work and my natural resource management, I spent 7 years in a high school classroom. So, you know, I think all of us have really taken our skills that we've done as a career path and put them all together as a collective unit to provide the best services we can for sustainable pollinator space. Yes.
I just wanted to go back to your comment about the bumblebees, sir. There are about 13-ish species in Maryland. And the Xerxes Society has put out a fantastic little, I believe, no, Fish and Wildlife Service has a little easy bumblebee guide. There is a little mini poster. If you go to the Fish and Wildlife Service website, they have a little mini poster with the eastern bumblebees. There's also a western version. And Xerxes Society is one of the best clearinghouses for citizen science in regards to pollinators. There's the Queen Quest. There's Bumble Watch. So there's these different ways for you to get involved with zero knowledge. That's what's great about citizen science. You don't have to know anything at all. It's designed for you to have zero skills coming in and build your skills as you follow the path of these, you know, step-by-step programs that they offer. So xerxessociety.com, or it's just xerxes.org. Xerxes.org.
And if you go to our website,
good stuff out there. Easy to pick it up.
Pollinators, and you go to get involved, we have a page called Pollinator Particulars, and it has a button farm, I call it. It has a button farm, as I call it, and all of the buttons are links to Xerxes Bumblebee Watch, to Queen Quest, which is your early emerging, and Xerxes is an amazing clearinghouse for invertebrate national citizen science programs. And other really cool pieces. So the whole Monarch joint venture integrated monitoring Monarch monitoring protocol. So, which I recently was certified in, so it's all in my head. And then one of the other links that we have is the Xerxes Library of Resources. They have phenomenal resources. And there's also a link to the Maryland Guide for Bees, which is brand new. It came out of Sam Drogi's lab and other partners with him. And that is what we use for our own pollinator inventory for the fresh tidal estuary pollinator inventory. So if you really want to learn your bees, come hang out with me and do that, because you'll learn them in quick, because you're going to be IDing lots of the same one and learning how to differentiate between them. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I don't want to comment. said about lawns. I've noticed I've allowed the clover to grow on my lawn, and the bumblebees seem to like the clover.
You keep your clover. Believe it or not, people don't. So they hose it down. And we keep our clover too. We don't. And thankfully, the one thing that we've gotten our landlord to stop doing is spraying with anything. So show up in tears to your landlord. They'll stop doing something real fast.
Is there, what is the effect of spraying for mosquitoes? And I've heard about this organic mosquito spray. And
Oh, I'd love to field that one, Mel.
Yes. But is there any like education efforts or anything that's teaching people about better, if you want to get rid of mosquitoes, you can just dump in your water supply? I mean, can you speak to that at all?
Well, I certainly will refer back to Chesapeake Pesticide Education Network because they have a whole link about that. And I'm also going to let Lindsay field the rest of that question because she...
So I don't mean to steal Mel's thunder, but we just covered this because one of our colleagues, her mom had one of the mosquito control companies come around and wanted to give her some business. And so her mom was concerned about the effect that these chemicals would have in her garden and reached out to us to help answer the question. And I'm blanking on the name of the active ingredient that was in this pesticide company, but the bottom line is that this mosquito spray was using something that, from the human perspective, I didn't even bother with the insect perspective because I know from other research that it doesn't matter if you're trying to target the mosquitoes, there will be other insects that perish. I mean, that's inevitable, it's unavoidable. There's nothing mosquito specific out there that you can buy. You are going to impact your pollinators, period. So that aside, this widely available, publicly used chemical is a carcinogen according to the EU. There's also acute damage from our own National Institute of Health, I believe. There's a toxicity database, and I regret I can't tell you the name of it off the top of my head, but we have our own toxicity database in the United States, and this chemical caused acute damage to aquatic animals as well as long-term damage to aquatic animals. So if you care anything about the bay creatures that are out here, using these this one particular mosquito spray had these ingredients. So I am speaking to one specific active ingredient, but I feel like the trend is probably fairly common across the industry that these things are not very well regulated. They're not very well studied before they're put out to public use. So this thing that is widely used is a known carcinogen and actively harming our estuaries. So if you are looking into one of these mosquito control companies, the first thing you should do for yourself, for your pets, for your yard, for the bay, for your pollinators, for all of the above, is find out what the active ingredient is and research the active ingredient. And then there's a couple easy to find websites. Environmental Working Group has their own danger list. That is a great resource, ewg.org, Environmental Working Group. And there is this toxicity database that we have that is through one of our government organizations, the Chesapeake Pesticide Network. There are organizations out there that will educate you. Please be careful. I understand if you want to use it, there's a lot of scary stuff with the mosquitoes, but there's a lot of scary stuff if you use the spray also. So you need to weigh your options.
Well, and folks who work in natural resources, another way that we battle the ticks, the mosquitoes, is we dress appropriately. And it's not always cute, and it doesn't always look great, but I very rarely put any pesticide on me or my clothes, but I also dress appropriately for it. I close up everything, basically. People tease me all the time because I'm always in my bogs because I don't want ticks, and I also don't want to hose myself down with pesticides daily. So there's just some choices I think are self-choices. And again, I think that the Chesapeake Pesticide Education Network does have a lot of receivables you could pass along about pouring out spare water. And remember when I said I fill up all my waters every day for my pets? Even your pet water can be a serious source. If if you replenish it every day and you give them and you monitor your pets enough and know how much water they use, you give them what they're going to use, or just over what they're going to use. So I don't give my animals 8 days of water every day because I know I might have to pour it out because there might be mosquito larvae in it. It's just the way it is. So I would suggest, just evaluating what you're doing and then using some of these really great resources to find out other things. We are not pesticide specialists, although we're always going to discourage use when we can.
Oh, just that I've seen, the mosquitoes also reproduce in such little amount of water. It was like wet grass trimmings and also harbor mosquito larvae.
Okay.
It can be tough, like I said. I mean, I pour out my dog's water almost every morning, but he also only has, when he comes in to sleep at night, when I take him out in the morning, first thing, I go fill his water, I dump what was left, and it dries up on the hot pavement of the driveway. So, your grass...
If you have a healthy habitat, there's going to be the natural controls that help regulate.
I was just about to say, if you're using your beneficial insects, and Xerces has an amazing book on beneficial insects on open space, and it does encourage you to make sure that your dragonflies, even your bats, we have great native bats here in Maryland. I know we have them at our house. And those predatory insects that do take care of some of those mosquitoes. I mean, your frogs, that aquatic life forms that Lindsay was talking about, you have all of those that feed primarily on mosquito larvae when they're tadpoles and when they're babies. Birds use caterpillars, amphibians use mosquito larvae. So it's an important piece. Yes.
Two little things. One, I heard recently that opossums love ticks.
Yes, they
We
do.
don't have that many in our woods, but
Yeah, so a possum will eat about 5,600 ticks a day. It's insane. It's like a tremendous number of ticks. That possums, it's like their favorite feast. So if you don't have a pet possum, I'm selling them for $5 million a piece. And you can get them right here. No.
also are the supposed natural herbicides using vinegar, Epsom salts, that kind of.
So there are some things, and I would encourage you, again, to use, and just because I've gone to the conference and it's always incredible, is that Chesapeake Pesticide Education Network. They have a host of things out there, from if you're going to use a chemical, which one you should use, like which one is least harm, which of the, eucalyptus, I think, is the only FDA-approved actual mosquito herb type spray that you can use that actually works. So there are different things. WSA can be a really great resource as well if you're involved with them. Thank you, Noelle. WSA, I will totally. So we are going to be seen again in a much lighter version of ourselves, a more traditional version of what we are, at Homestead Gardens on July 28th. From 9 to 11, we are partnering with WSA. It is one of their recruitment events, which if you have not joined Watershed Stewards Academy, learn about proper water and stormwater management and how you can best use your space to be a good model in all of those control methods, and that includes mosquito control as well, is to go to the Watershed Stewards Academy, go to the conference, and be a steward, because you have to actively participate in these stewardship activities, and you can do them in a range of places in Anne Arundel County. So it's a really intensely great program. We love being consortium members with WSA. Homestead Gardens, as you know, is beautiful. And they have a great team over there. They have this beautiful meadow that we're going to be teaching alongside of. I'm going to tackle the pollinators. WSA is going to give you an idea of what you can expect from taking the Watershed Stewards Academy class 11. Class 11. And then Homestead, Heather, their education coordinator, is going to talk about what plants they have right now that you should be putting in. Remember perennials. Perennials are always the best bet. We believe in fall plantings. We believe in what we call autogenic approaches, meaning less time on our hands and let nature do its thing. If you plant something, you don't get the immediate gratification of all the beautiful flowers in the fall, like a lot of people have to have, But it's a super good surprise the next year when they all start popping up and they have naturally established themselves with hours and hours of you putting water that then becomes habitat for mosquitoes down in a time frame that mosquitoes are very active. In the fall, they're not breeding as much. It's getting a little too cold for them. It starts raining naturally, and then we don't have as many mosquitoes. So you can think of a ton of things that you can actively do. Planting in the fall is one of those things. So, and if you have any more questions about WSA, Noelle is here. She is brand new over there. What, you've been there 2 months?
I started on June 4th. I'm the new program coordinator. I took over the position that Natalia Sanchez formerly held. And actually, if people don't mind, would all the watershed stewards, the master watershed stewards in the room, please stand up right now so we can make ourselves known?
That would be incredible. There you go. How many master naturalists do we have in the room? Do we have any master naturalists, master gardeners?
I was in Water Steward Class 1.
You were in class 1. Well, congrats. That's awesome. It's an amazing program, I have to tell you. We really enjoy being part of it. Any other questions for us?
It's not a question, but I have a thing called Tea for the Bees, which is just gathering people together. We have watched Vanishing of the Bees twice by request. The second time, I am also on the Maryland Sierra Club Pesticide Committee. So if you feel like you want to gather with other people, it's not even a nonprofit. It's kind of like, just.
It's a very informal, great conversation and green group for you to sit down and have a conversation with other people who are curious, other people who are having the same questions you are, and then you tackle a question together. I think that it's I love what y'all are doing. I really do. It's great to see y'all again, by the way. Tea with the bees, right? Tea with the bees. Tea for the bees or with? Tea for the bees. We'll probably stick around and have a beer if you have any further questions and something to eat really quick. So thank you so much for your patience and time.
Thank you.